From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, April 16th. You're listening to the Macrocast. Tony Fratto, New York. You have John Fagan, Brendan Walsh, our regular partners at Markets Policy Partners, and the great John Dick coming to us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today. John with Civic Science. And guys, we'll take a look at the Treasury's currency report, the foreign exchange report that came out this morning. We'll get into that in a little bit, but first, to look at the macro situation out there. We've had data, we've had earnings, a lot of anecdotal stories. I think it's safe to say this is a pretty hot economy right now. We had, weekly claims had a huge drop yesterday, which was good to see, down into something starting with 500,000 instead of the 700,000, 800,000, 900,000 weekly claims that we've grown accustomed to over the past year. So that's a really nice trend that we hope continues. Markets are hitting all-time highs. Both the S&P and the Dow touched all-time highs yesterday. Optimism, John Dick, is like, I think it's people are feeling pretty good about the future. They're feeling good about getting vaccinated. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, sort of. It's kind of counterintuitive until it's not, if you think about it. But if our ESI that came out on Tuesday,
there was a dip.
It was a dip, and it was a second dip in a row. And what's really unusual is, as we've watched this thing over the last 8 years, it's very uncommon that the five different metrics we track generally are normally going in the same direction by and large. But what you have this week was job optimism numbers that were through the roof, and pretty much everything else was a little down. And I think the takeaway is that, COVID sort of overshadows all, man. And we've got rising cases. You've got the J&J setback spooked people a bit. And here's like the sort of ugly thing about it. Like, putting the ESI aside, one of the other things, or several of the other things we track, is just overall kind of consumer comfort returning to certain things, restaurants, travel, so on and so on. Those numbers are actually up a little bit. And that's also unusual for those numbers to be up in spite when cases are also going up. That's another thing that we've seen differently. And here's the very simple answer. There are a lot of people who are increasingly cavalier about returning to normal consumerism, who are they are the group of people who are not planning to get vaccinated. That's what's messed up, right? So if you think like 44% of Americans say like, yeah, I'm comfortable and ready to travel again, that's not the vaccinated 44%. That's the unvaccinated 44% who are like, you know what, I'm over this. And as long as everyone else is getting vaccinated, I can be more cavalier about it. Well, unfortunately, what that's doing is it's spooking the 56% who weren't ready to travel. And so
I saw an advertisement for a New England cruise this summer. Old people going on a cruise on New England. So we're planning to get back to normal,
like it or not.
Everyone's not vaccinated yet.
Right. Are the cruises requiring vaccinations?
Well, they're not allowed. So Florida is actually suing the United States government because cruises aren't allowed yet. But yes, cruise lines are planning to require some sort of passport.
Yeah.
But
that's another issue we can talk about is how you do that.
Yeah, the unvaccinated, look, we don't need to stereotype here. There's a particular political tribe that has a particular attitude about this thing, and they're feeling emboldened and empowered, not because they're being vaccinated, but because everyone else sort of is, and they just generally feel like, well, screw it, I'm kind of over it, and I'm going to dive back in, and that's just kind of putting a bigger fraction.
No, it's fascinating. Basically, 5% of Democrats don't want to get vaccinated. Something like 20% of independents, and it's like 50%
right,
of
basically
don't want to get vaccinated.
And
so it still allows us to get herd immunity, but that's a lot of people.
And so, Tony, to bring it back to like the economic sentiment index, it's just creating this really weird combination of optimism and pessimism. And the pessimism, I think, is short-lived. It's people are just so hypersensitive to, oh my God, like we're going to go back to where we were before because I mean way back, but I mean back to like COVID freakouts because the vaccine isn't going to work. And now people aren't going to get vaccinated and they're not going to get vaccinated and they're going to go back in public and we're going to have massive spreads again. And so we're just in this weird spot right now where I think the consumer is being cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. And also I think people are realizing if you're vaccinated, you still can get COVID.
Yeah, right,
and your kids aren't vaccinated. So I don't know. The summer is going to be fascinating from a sociological standpoint, from like a behavioral standpoint. I'm not sure how it's going to be. And also going back to the jobs number. So we still have the pandemic assistance money, which you get an extra $300, which is great. But when you look at the JOLTS data, we have a 2 million gap between how many jobs are open and how many people we're hiring. And I do worry a little bit that, so it kind of goes back to, if you watch the Michael Jordan film. So Scottie Pippen decided not to get surgery and he waited till the season. And he said, I didn't want to F up my summer. I think a lot of people don't want to F up their summer and they're not going to go back. They'll take their $300 and make $12 an hour.
It's possible that, there's been, look, lots of anecdotal stories, like a story that, some friends wrote the other day about, a diner that shut down, not because business wasn't great. They had a line out the street for the diner, but it could not hire people to work in the diner, right? So again, these are anecdotal. I still look at initial claims week after week after week after week after week, where
this week or last week
companies are literally like still right. These are initial claims. These are people who were not,
and that's real money. That's a check that's attached to it. That's not an economic data point. That's an actual money's going out the door. So that's a real number.
Right. And if people if you just logically understand what that is, that's someone who had a job 2 weeks ago and then didn't have a job last week. That means they were laid off.
I totally agree. Yeah.
So like you have these stories of people who don't want to get, who say they cannot find workers, and then other places that are literally laying off people still at what in normal circumstances would be horrific rates of creation of unemployment. So there's churn out there. I think it's going to take a while to sort some of this out. I do think with sentiment, this is a hunch, John Dick, is that I do think we are going to get to a point where, I had 2 conversations this morning with people who are fully vaccinated and getting together with other people who are fully vaccinated. So like they're going to do like other things. And I've done that myself, by the way, fully vaccinated. I've gotten to get together with other people who are, who I know and in fact are fully vaccinated. There's going to come a point where, not that cases are going to go to zero, but that if vaccinations are fully available to everyone, that some people are just going to be on their own, and if you decide that you want to take the risk of getting COVID and you have the opportunity to get vaccinated, that just from an ethical standpoint, there's nothing more that we can do. We spent a year trying to protect vulnerable populations. Yeah. We spent a year trying to protect frontline workers who were still serving other people for various reasons. We went through all of that. We're doing all of that. At a certain point, you just have to say, like, you don't want to get vaccinated, then you're the risk to yourself at that point. And I don't know any other way to think about it. I do know that puts people who are unable to get the vaccine because of some medical indication that they're not able to get the vaccine, that puts them at risk. There's a there's the ethical challenge, but I don't think we're going to overcome that. So I do think we are. I do still think we look at the summer, and I think people who have been vaccinated are going to overcome their reticence and get back to it. I really do.
This could be another hour-long podcast of its own, so I won't open the massive can of worms. But there's one group that's an exception to what you're saying, and that's BIPOC, mostly Black and Hispanics. We have the under penetration of vaccines. If you look at sort of the white population has been vaccinated at a remarkably faster pace than the non-white population, and if you look at putting aside the political tribe, I think we're stereotyping that is saying, no, screw that, I'm not getting vaccinated. There is a large group of Black and Hispanic Americans.
We're seeing that in DC.
Who are saying,
all the data.
I've seen the data on this. It's true. There's no question that they are less likely. It is, but they are not the least likely.
Absolutely.
By far, it is still, white Republicans without a college degree are by far the largest group. By far, question. Not even close, right?
No question. But I guess that my only point though is there's the group that's choosing on some sort of basis of like false libertarian personal freedom or whatever, or they think that this a Bill Gates conspiracy. And then there's a group of people that have just like genuinely been disenfranchised by the healthcare system for generations and have reasons to possibly, justifiable reasons to be cautious or whatever. And so
no question.
Right. So we've also got to help that process along in a way to get that large. It is a large enough population to matter to make sure.
I'm not saying we shouldn't. No. Let me be very clear on that. And in fact, I have made personal interventions.
Yes.
With especially Black friends who I know to strongly encourage that they get it. So we at Hamilton Place Strategies actually worked on some of the communications dealing vaccine hesitancy. So we're I think you're 100% right. I actually think that population is gettable. I think with the right messengers and the right messaging, we can overcome and get a high degree in that community, and we should. I think that's what we have an obligation to. And they are absolutely justified.
Sure.
In their belief, right? The fact that Black Americans and some others were used as essentially guinea pigs on in decades past, and have heard these stories through the generations of what was the horrific things that were done, but that's not where we are today, and we need to help in that.
Hopefully, that's a when, not if.
As business owners, so we saw the NFL kind of did the carrot and the stick. They said, you don't have to get it, but if you don't get it, we're going to make your life hell. Are you going to require people to get vaccinated to come back to the office?
It's
or can you? How does that work?
We can. We absolutely could do that. I think there. I don't know whether we're going to have anyone at our firm who won't be vaccinated. But if that's the case, I mean, I think we'd have to consider, how they work. I mean, the problem is, and the distinction I have made always is that if you have, your people coming in contact with, guests and visitors, then you need to be vaccinated. So should McDonald's demand that all of their people, all of their retail get vaccinated? Absolutely. They're coming in contact with unsuspecting population. They need to be vaccinated for their own protection and for the protection of their customers. If you are an office of accountants, where no one comes to the office, you make your own rules on whatever it is that you want to do. At HPS, we welcome we hold events, right? Yeah, we hold events, we have receptions, we welcome our clients into our space. And so we probably have to give them some assurance that they're in a safe place.
Yeah, because if I don't get my free food on Fridays, I'm leaving.
Yeah. Well, look, every business in the exactly. So every business in the country is going through these exact same questions. And by the way, like a large number of them want to get back into the office, and so they are in fact having to think through these things and its issues for public transportation and everything else. But I think we've seen earnings are pretty good so far, right?
Bank earnings have been through the roof. Yeah. But interesting enough, the stock reaction has been fairly muted.
I think maybe because it's been priced in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the frustrating part about being. I used to be a bank analyst, where you can put whatever multiple you want on Amazon. A bank in the end actually has a tangible book value that kind of it trades on. So it's just not that very fun to be a bank analyst.
And that's a really key point, Brendan. The earnings season is nuanced here. We've seen a big rally in the sectors that had lagged during the height of the pandemic. The real economy stocks, banks included, they call them value stocks on Wall Street. They tend to be the industrials, the materials, and that sort of stuff. They got walloped, obviously, by COVID-19 and the fallout thereof. But they've staged an enormous comeback here, and they've outperformed tech, which had been the darlings of the pandemic era equity rally. But now that we're going into earnings season, it's easier to buy. It's easier to buy the story of the recovery when maybe you're not seeing the earnings, and so it's easier to get excited about the retail coming back and some of these stories before management comes out and says, "Hey, our costs have gone up." And we saw that in Rite Aid. We saw that in Fastenal, the industrial fastener bellwether for that industry. Talking about some of the nuances and why it basically is still ripples from the pandemic. We don't think that that's going to change the trend over time, but during earnings season there is that period of digestion where you get to see some of these issues really front and center and described by management.
And some of the commentary from the banks was negative for banks. It's good for America, where they're just not seeing loan demand. And part of it is literally because we spent $5 trillion and we handed it to people. So people are actually doing okay in America.
And it's still coming.
And we have more coming. Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, why don't we take a break and come back and let's take a look at the Treasury Foreign Exchange Report and see what news we can glean from that. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provides sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com or visit them on Twitter at marketspolicy.
All right, we're back on the Macrocast. We'll get to the currency report in our third segment. John Dick, what are you seeing on back to work? I mean, are people into this?
I think you've got two groups. I think it's almost perfectly symmetrical. You've got if a remote worker, say somebody was working remotely 6 months ago, a third of those people are back in the office. Actually a little more than that. 37% are already back working in person. But 34% are saying it's going to be at least 4 to 6 months again until they're back in the office. Right. So and then there's that little bit of small third in the middle. Actually not even 20% in the middle. So it's basically, if you're in a business, say, are
those people never want to come back, or they're just hesitant?
This is people based on when they expect they're going to have to go back. Yep. Yeah. Now wanting to go back, and let's come back to that in a second. That's a whole different dimension. Mm-hmm. But basically a third are in, a third are going to be much later, and then maybe we'll see some trickle over. But we're not going to see a lot of people running back to the office in the middle of the summer when they don't have to, they have vacations and all that. But this has a lot of implications for urban retail. The QSRs that people are walking by to grab coffee and get sandwiches at lunch. Those things are until commuters are back at full speed, if ever. There are certain categories of retail and food service that are going to struggle. Now, the other side of this, and I know, Tony, we've talked about this a lot over the last year, but basically 41% of Americans right now say that they would actually be willing to work for less money if they had the opportunity to work from anywhere they could. Okay. And that doesn't mean they'll be given that choice, but saying they would, if given that choice, they would choose it. The other big one is that, and I think we've gone back and forth on this on Twitter about this, Tony, is that basically a third of Americans say that if they could work remotely from their current job, they would leave the city or state they currently live in. Mm-hmm. And actually that number jumps to almost 40% among people who don't have kids. And so we're just going to see a lot of shuffling around of people in the next, because that puts a lot of pressure on employers. If particularly young talent that's in certain, like say STEM fields and the like, demand to work from a certain place, then that's where they're going to work from. And that's going to change a lot. It's going to have inflows and outflows. I think there might be people in cities who would rather live in the country and people who are stuck in certain, company towns that may want to live in the city. So there are a lot of fascinating changes coming.
I think for a lot of companies, it's gonna make sense, and maybe even be able to attract better talent and rationalize their pay by having distributed workers. I think for a lot of other companies, they are going to be able to attract the talent they want, because they're going to cluster talent together and work in collaborative environments and places that are attractive for certain kinds of talent. And that's just to say that there's nothing wrong with breaking down whatever the traditional form of work is, if it just creates a lot of freedom. So I've joked on Twitter that I hope all of my competitors go to distributed workforces. I hope they all do, because I see like brain power in our shop working together is a superpower of ours, right? Like the ability to work really good with each other, teach, pass on knowledge, all the things that happen, frankly, in between meetings, that is really powerful. We see it as a superpower. Like it's really, really good and helpful.
Totally
Makes our people better. But that may not be the same everywhere. That may not be the same kind of thing if you're a programmer, or, if you're writing code and you want to be holed up in wherever, like that's fine. So what all I'm saying is that it's going to shake out in different ways for different businesses, depending on how they work and what their styles are. And that is, to me, overall beneficial for the economy and should elevate productivity.
But so very interesting on that front. Basically, every employee of Coinbase moved to Reno, and they're going to stay there for 2 years to avoid taxes.
Well, those things matter.
So they're still together, but they just left California.
Tony, the one thing I would say about your case, I think, which is different than a lot of others, is that the people with the skills necessary and the experience necessary to work in your company just naturally happen to be concentrated in DC area to begin with, right? Like, no. I think Silicon Valley is a place where people, that same phenomenon still exists, because that's like the center of the universe when you're in sort of like next gen tech and software. But if you take places like companies whose talent is not necessarily inherent in the locality of where they're located, I think is a different story, right? Like, why is Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati? It's not because Cincinnati just naturally breeds brilliant, consumer brand marketers. They brought them there or whatever. So anyway,
I see your point. Like, for example, we're looking for people who are both interested in and either have worked in or aspire to work in places like the government, the Hill, think tanks, foundations, of which there is an intense concentration in a place like DC. That said, though, that our way of working and teaching and culture enhances all of those, so that they can share and pick up the skills that they could go, take somewhere else. So that if we were to hire someone who worked in, say, state government, and that kind of work somewhere else, and said, I love your company, I love HPS, but I'd like to stay in Columbus, and this is my home, and I'd really like to work here, they would have the same, either aspirations or experiences, but would definitely lose the benefit of working with people who worked in, the 10 other experiences that you get in our shop. And so they would not be better by remote. But I do think that there are professions, like if you're just doing economic analysis, right? Economic research analysis, you could be anywhere.
Yeah.
You can live on a boat, right? It doesn't matter where you are. You don't need to be, necessarily around other people. There are lots of jobs that are like that. The law is like that. Like you may have to go, trek in to present in court if you're a litigator. That's about it.
And only like John knows what 5% of lawyers actually ever go into a courtroom.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's higher if you count the ones that go in as defendants.
Yeah, exactly. No, but that's going to be fascinating from a commercial real estate standpoint. Especially, law is the perfect example. You need an office.
Yeah.
But you probably just realize you don't need the size office that you have.
Yeah. And by the way, like everyone's like bemoaning, how bad it is in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, that all of these people are leaving for Reno and Austin. And it's like, actually, like you're elevating standard of the quality of life in the valley. Right?
That was the problem of San Francisco. It was hard.
Right. I mean, it was like the intense price pressure. Like it was like you could not afford to live there. It's like you say it's going to become a little bit more affordable. New York is the same way. It's like we're going to swap people in and out. And if New York gets totally a little bit affordable for a little while, that's not a bad thing.
One of my good friends just moved to Sausalito because he's having a baby, and he had to outbid somebody to rent a house in Sausalito. People still want to live in the cool cities.
Hey, let's break, come back, and dive into the currency report and get the news there. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Every 2 weeks, HPS measures U.S. adults' feelings and expectations for the economy. The Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index, powered by HPS, accurately measures movements in overall national economic sentiment and provides a more sophisticated alternative to existing economic sentiment indices. To learn more, contact us through hamiltonplacestrategies.com.
All right, we're back on the Macrocast. John Fagan, what is in that report? I saw China.
Yeah.
China is the big news is China is not listed as a currency manipulator, but still on the watch. That's the biggest news, right? What else?
That's correct. That's kind of the headline grabber, that China is not designated. China had been designated, as we remember, very briefly. I think it was only 5 months at the heat of the U.S.-China trade spat in 2019. It was
the famous report designation.
Yes, it was a late afternoon.
Weren't you in charge of this? Wasn't that your old job? Were you in charge of the? I
wasn't in charge of it. I was part of the team that that produced the currency report, and so I was part of, I think, 8 or 10 currency reports. Yeah.
And so just to it is something that encompasses a lot of Treasury staff, and I want to have a shout out to the great professional people that work on that report. It's not an easy job. I've seen it close up, as you have, Tony. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of considerations involved. There are some overlapping mandates. Clearly, they've got the criteria which have been handed down to them through legislation in 2015, and they have to at least stick with that criteria to some great extent, apply that. And then there's the enforcement aspect, which is pretty toothless when you look at it. It really is about,
what did we do to Switzerland?
Engagement. It's very behind the scenes. So the Treasury FX report is a bit of a tricky beast, even stand on a standalone basis. But this current iteration was facing the added challenge of coming off of the final report under the Trump administration. Secretary Mnuchin's last report had something of a freewheeling designation of manipulators, putting in Switzerland and Vietnam as designated currency manipulators and expanding the watch list pretty significantly. China was not designated in that last report under Secretary Mnuchin. So it isn't a big surprise at all. They don't fit all three of the criteria. Those criteria, just for those of you keeping score at home, and you want to fill out your own bracket of currency manipulators: current account surplus equivalent to 2% of GDP, a bilateral trade surplus of 20 billion at least, and foreign exchange intervention of 2% of the country's GDP. Now that is basically going to stick. If you're a smaller country like Switzerland, like Vietnam, you're more likely to trip those than a big one like China, for instance, because 2% of FX intervention at 2% of GDP, it's certainly not equivalent, and China would have a hard time getting to that level of kind of intervention. So, not a big surprise. They stripped the designation from Switzerland and Vietnam. That was kind of for the inside crowd, folks like Mark Sobel, who ran that report for I don't know how many decades. That was the focus that he had. How are they going to deal with these designations? There's a reason that Switzerland and Vietnam haven't been designated in the past, even if they do trip the criteria. And that was referenced in this report. They talked about sort of, malice. If you're going into kind of the courtroom style, they referenced the 1988 act, which really gets to the heart of why currencies are manipulated, basically creating an unfair trade advantage or preventing a balance of payment adjustments to an untoward degree. And they said, so while Switzerland, also Taiwan, and Vietnam trip all three criteria, they don't fall under the kind of malice aforethought 1988 conditions that they saw fit to apply. Now, when you step back, it did seem a little bit odd to designate Vietnam, a country that perhaps was tripping these criteria because of the trade enforcement that the Trump administration was levying against China. Everyone knows that Vietnam has benefited from that, and that supply lines and manufacturing have actually moved into Vietnam to diversify away from China. So they're a very important ally in the region. So it seemed a little bit like they were rowing in the wrong direction on that particular issue, but they seem to have fixed it here. The markets are taking it all in very much stride. And it seems as though, although the watch list is very long, again, it's more of a kind of check a box exercise. This has dialed down the politicization that we saw during the Trump era and has put Secretary Yellen's stamp on the report.
That's an excellent review. It's but maybe we'll get a chance. In fact, we're gonna have to have a return visit of the great Mark Sobel, and go deeper into not just the report, but the just take a look at the international situation and talk through some of the currency issues, which are fascinating, and there's no one better than Mark to get into them. So we'll make a point of that, guys. Great show. Have a fantastic weekend. John, Dick, take care of Pittsburgh for me.
Will do.
We'll see you guys soon. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.